Ancient Egyptians watched a small beetle roll balls of dung across the sand and saw in that humble creature one of the most profound symbols of cosmic renewal, self-creation, and the eternal cycle of death and rebirth. That beetle became Khepri, the scarab god who rolls the sun across the sky each day. Khepri represents one of the most remarkable examples of Egyptian religious thought transforming everyday observation of nature into cosmic mythology. The connection between a dung beetle and the sun god might seem bizarre to modern minds, but to the Egyptians, the scarab beetle's behavior revealed fundamental truths about existence, creation, and the daily miracle of sunrise. Understanding Khepri requires understanding how Egyptians saw the natural world as a living text written by the gods, where even the smallest creature could embody divine principles. What makes Khepri's mythology so fascinating is how it illustrates the Egyptian genius for finding sacred meaning in the mundane, for seeing cosmic patterns reflected in the behavior of insects, for understanding that the greatest mysteries of existence might be explained through careful observation of the smallest details of the natural world. The scarab beetle's life cycle became a template for understanding resurrection, self-generation, and the sun's daily journey, proving that Egyptian religion was built on empirical observation as much as on divine revelation. If you're fascinated by how ancient Egyptians found profound meaning in nature's patterns, subscribe to Snapshot Myths. We're exploring the full depth of Egyptian religious thought, from the cosmic to the commonplace, and your support helps us continue revealing how these ancient people understood their world. Hit that like button to help others discover these remarkable stories. The scarab beetle, scientifically known as Scarabæus socer, is a dung beetle common throughout Egypt and the Mediterranean region. Egyptians observed these beetles with fascination, watching as they formed balls of animal dung, rolled these balls across considerable distances, and buried them in underground chambers. What appeared to be simple insect behavior was actually a sophisticated survival strategy. The beetles laid their eggs inside the dung balls, providing their larvae with food when they hatched. But the Egyptians, not having modern biological knowledge, interpreted what they saw through the lens of their cosmological understanding. To Egyptian observers, the most remarkable aspect of scarab behavior was the apparent spontaneous generation of new beetles from the buried dung balls. They would watch beetles roll and bury balls, but they never saw the beetles laying eggs because this happened inside the buried balls. Then, weeks later, new beetles would emerge from the ground where balls had been buried, seemingly creating themselves from nothing more than dung and earth. This appeared to be self-creation, generation without parents, life emerging from death and decay, a perfect natural metaphor for the Egyptian concept of Khepri, which means to come into being, to transform, to take form. The name Khepri derives directly from this root word Khepri, making the god's very name an expression of his essential nature as the one who comes into being, the self-created, the transformer. Temple texts refer to Khepri as he who came into existence by himself, emphasizing this quality of autonomous generation that paralleled how Atum created himself from the primordial waters at the beginning of time. Khepri embodied the principle that existence can emerge from potential, that form can manifest from formlessness, that each day's sunrise represents a new act of creation as miraculous as the original creation of the cosmos. The connection between the scarab's dung ball and the sun became one of Egyptian religion's most central and enduring symbols. Just as the beetle rolled its ball across the ground, so too did Khepri roll the sun across the sky each day. The ball shape, the rolling motion, the journey from one place to another, the burial underground followed by emergence into light. All of these aspects of scarab behavior mapped perfectly onto the Egyptian understanding of the sun's daily cycle of rising, traveling across the sky, setting, traveling through the underworld, and rising again. In Egyptian theological thought, the sun god had three forms corresponding to different times of day. Khepri represented the morning sun, the newborn sun at dawn, emerging fresh and renewed from the underworld. Ra represented the sun at its zenith, the fully mature, powerful sun blazing at noon. Atum represented the evening sun, the aged sun descending toward death and the underworld. These weren't three separate gods but three aspects of the same divine solar power, and Khepri's role as the morning form emphasized themes of birth, renewal, youth, and the daily miracle of resurrection. Temple hymns addressed to the morning sun often invoked Khepri specifically. The pyramid texts contain prayers like Khepri, "You have come into being on the head of Ra," describing how the scarab god manifests each dawn, bringing the sun into existence anew. This wasn't merely poetic language but expressed the Egyptian conviction that each sunrise was genuinely a new creation, that the sun that set yesterday truly died and the sun that rises today is newly born, making every dawn a miniature repetition of the original creation of the universe. Egyptian cosmology described the sun's movement across the sky as a journey in a divine boat called the solar barque or sunboat. During the day, the sun traveled across the body of Nut, the sky goddess, sailing from east to west. At sunset, the sun entered the underworld, called the Duhat, and traveled through its 12 regions corresponding to the 12 hours of night, facing dangers and battling chaos forces before emerging reborn at dawn. Khepri's role in this mythology was specifically at the moment of rebirth, the emergence from the underworld into the new day. Temple reliefs and papyrus illustrations often show Khepri at the prow of the solar barque, as it emerges from the underworld at dawn. Sometimes Khepri appears as a scarab beetle pushing or rolling the sun disk ahead of the boat. Other images show Khepri as a human figure with a scarab beetle for a head, making the sacred gesture of adoration toward the newly risen sun, as if Khepri himself is worshipping the sun even as he is the sun, a paradox that reveals the complexity of Egyptian theological thought about identity and transformation. The scarab became one of ancient Egypt's most ubiquitous and important amulet forms, worn by living people for protection and placed with the dead to ensure resurrection. Scarab amulets were carved from stone, molded from faience, or fashioned from precious materials, often with hieroglyphic inscriptions on the flat underside. Some scarabs were purely decorative or served as seals for stamping documents, but many carried specifically religious purposes connected to Khepri's powers of self-creation, transformation, and renewal. The heart scarab was particularly significant in funerary practices. This large scarab amulet was placed on the chest of the mummy directly over the heart during the mummification process. The underside was inscribed with Chapter 30b from the Book of the Dead, a spell that prevented the heart from testifying against the deceased during the weighing of the heart ceremony in the afterlife. The spell essentially asks the heart, addressed as a sacred scarab, not to reveal the deceased's sins to the judges, appealing to Khepri's transformative power to allow rebirth despite imperfection. Khepri's association with self-creation made him particularly important in funerary religion and resurrection beliefs. The deceased hoped to imitate Khepri's power of self-generation, to emerge from the tomb as the scarab beetle emerged from underground, to be reborn through their own inner power rather than remaining dependent on external forces. Funerary texts contain prayers identifying the deceased with Khepri, asking to share in the god's ability to come into being, to transform, to manifest renewed life from death and darkness. The Book of the Dead includes spells for becoming Khepri, which allowed the deceased to take the form of the scarab beetle and thereby access its powers of transformation and self-creation. These transformation spells weren't merely symbolic, but were understood as genuinely effective magic that would allow the deceased soul to physically become the scarab, to roll their own ball, perhaps representing their body or their renewed form, and emerge reborn just as the beetle did. The Egyptians took these transformations literally, not metaphorically. Some creation myths specifically incorporate Khepri into the original formation of the cosmos. In these versions, Khepri is identified with or as an aspect of Atum, the self-created original god. The pyramid texts record that Atum Khepri masturbated or spat to create the first pair of gods, Shu and Tefnut, emphasizing the self-generative power that both Atum and Khepri embodied. The connection makes theological sense because both Atum and Khepri represent the same principle of autonomous self-creation, of bringing oneself into existence without requiring parents or external causes. In this mythology, the first sunrise was literally the first time Khepri rolled the sun into the sky, establishing the pattern that would repeat daily forever after. Before Khepri's first push, the sun existed only as potential in the darkness of none, the primordial waters. Khepri's action of rolling the sun up from the depths and across the sky was the primal act that established time, that created the distinction between day and night, that made cosmic order possible by introducing the fundamental cycle upon which all other cycles would be built. The Khepri mythology carries profound philosophical implications about the nature of existence and causation. If new beetles emerge without visible parents, if the sun is reborn each morning rather than being the same sun that set the previous evening, then existence itself is characterized by constant renewal rather than simple continuity. Nothing simply persists unchanged. Everything is constantly coming into being anew, maintaining apparent continuity through processes of death and rebirth so rapid and seamless that they create the illusion of unchanging existence. This understanding connects to the Egyptian concept of cosmic order, which wasn't a static state but a dynamic balance constantly maintained through active participation by gods and humans. The sun doesn't simply continue to exist, it must be reborn each day. Khepri doesn't merely exist eternally, but must constantly engage in the action of rolling, pushing, bringing into being. Order isn't a natural default state but an achievement that requires continuous effort, continuous renewal, continuous recreation of what appears to simply continue existing. Modern sensibilities sometimes struggle with the fact that Khepri's sacred symbol, the scarab beetle, literally spends its life working with animal excrement. How could something associated with waste and decay become a symbol of the sun, rebirth, and cosmic renewal? But this apparent contradiction actually reveals the depth of Egyptian religious insight. They understood that death and life, decay and renewal, are not opposites but different phases of the same process. What appears as waste or ending is actually the raw material for new beginning. The dung ball itself can be understood as compressed death, the processed remains of consumed plant matter passed through an animal's body and expelled as waste, that this material becomes the nourishment for new scarab larvae, that life emerges from what seems completely lifeless, demonstrates the fundamental Egyptian principle that resurrection requires death, that renewal emerges from decay, that endings are necessary for new beginnings. The scarab doesn't succeed despite working with dung but precisely because it transforms death into life, waste into sustenance. Egyptian pharaohs incorporated Khepri symbolism into their royal ideology and titulary. Kings took scarab-related names and epithets, identifying themselves with Khepri's self-creating power and daily renewal. The pharaoh, like Khepri, was reborn each day, his power renewed through connection to the cosmic cycles. Royal architecture incorporated scarab imagery in temples and tombs, and kings commissioned massive scarab sculptures that still survive today, including the famous giant scarab at the Karnak temple complex. The identification between pharaoh and Khepri served political and theological purposes. It suggested that the king possessed the same self-creating, self-renewing power as the sun god, that royal authority was not granted by others, but emerged from the king's own divine nature. This ideology of autonomous kingship, of the pharaoh as self-created rather than appointed by predecessors or gods, paralleled Khepri's role as the self-generated aspect of solar divinity. Daily temple rituals incorporated Khepri worship, particularly in morning ceremonies that coincided with sunrise. Priests would perform rituals at dawn to assist Khepri in rolling the sun into the sky, to celebrate the successful rebirth of the sun after its dangerous night journey, and to ensure the cycle would continue. These rituals acknowledged that the sunrise, which we take as automatic and guaranteed, was actually understood as the daily victory of order over chaos, of life over death, of Khepri's creative power over the forces that sought to prevent the sun's return. Temple hymns sung at dawn specifically invoked Khepri by name, praising the god's emergence and requesting his blessings of renewal and transformation. The act of worship itself was seen as participating in the creative process, as if human acknowledgement and celebration of the sunrise actually helped bring it about, made it more complete, strengthened Khepri's power to continue the eternal cycle. This participatory cosmology meant that proper worship wasn't mere acknowledgement of what would happen anyway, but was essential support for cosmic order itself. Modern biology explains scarab beetle behavior without recourse to divine action. We understand that beetles lay eggs in dung balls, that larvae develop inside, consuming the dung, that adult beetles emerged naturally through genetic programming and biological development, not through self-creation or spontaneous generation. This scientific knowledge might seem to undermine Khepri's mythology, revealing it as a misunderstanding of natural processes. But this view misses what the Egyptians were actually doing with the Khepri myth. They weren't primarily making factual claims about scarab beetle reproduction. They were using the scarab as a symbol to explore and express profound truths about existence, renewal, transformation, and the eternal return of the sun. Whether beetles self-create or lay eggs is less important than the deeper pattern the myth illuminates. That life emerges from apparent death, that decay transforms into renewal, that endings make possible new beginnings, that existence is characterized by constant transformation rather than static persistence. These truths remain valid regardless of biological facts. The scarab symbol's influence extended far beyond ancient Egypt. It was adopted by neighboring cultures, incorporated into Greek and Roman thought, and later influenced various mystical and esoteric traditions. The image of the scarab beetle remains one of the most recognizable symbols of ancient Egyptian culture, appearing in museums, jewelry, art, and popular culture worldwide. This enduring appeal testifies to something universal in the symbol, something that resonates across cultures and millennia. Khepri teaches us that sacred meaning can be found in the smallest and humblest aspects of nature, that careful observation of the natural world reveals profound truths about existence, and that what appears mundane or even distasteful can become a window into cosmic mysteries when viewed with the right understanding. The ancient Egyptians watched a beetle roll a ball of dung across the sand and saw in that simple action the daily miracle of the sun's return, the mystery of self-creation, and the eternal promise that death and darkness are never final, but always give way to renewal and light. This video was created by combining human research and scriptwriting with AI-assisted visual production, bringing these ancient stories to life for modern audiences. For more Egyptian mythology, related products, and the tools we use to create this content, check the links in the description below.